it's not just me. I always have to rediscover how to do my job too every time I click on recording in progress. Okay, so so how many folks are, these are archaeology folks or just everybody? This is everybody from everywhere. You can always, well, I can see the chat too.
I think we advertised it as an archaeology day, but I'm doing archaeology.
Okay, everybody else in on the archaeology thing. Okay, so, if we want to learn about archaeology stuff, then we'll kind of focus on that. Now, I can always talk about my own experiences. Of course, what I'm talking about comes from my own experiences, but there's kind of, the stuff is changing so fast. And so there's some stuff I feel like I can kind of sense coming, or I hear from people who run cultural resources companies, and I'll just kind of hit on that too. So like in my own experience, no one ever even told me one time that there was a such thing as cultural resources until I graduated. I went to Boise State, which is like, it used to be a sweet football team that gave out degrees, and now it's just a place that sells degrees, right? The football team stinks right now. So there's no, when I went there in the 90s, there was no mentorship, no like assistance whatsoever. I mean, you were just kind of left to figure everything out on your own. And the only guidance I ever got was showing up every semester to show the classes I wanted to take to my advisor, who was assigned to me because my name was between like, S and Z or something like that. So they had no idea what I was interested in. I never spent any time talking to anyone. And the only guidance I ever got was, yeah, take those classes. And then that person who was helping me for supposedly for 4 years didn't even tell me all the classes that I was supposed to take. And so after I graduated, I still had to go back and finish some courses because they didn't even give me that advice. So I had to figure it all out on my own. And I also was like a student that had to work full time the whole time I was in college. So, it wasn't easy. I was working like 32 hours at least a week and also taking a full load of undergrad classes. So I never got to do any of the internships. Like the only time I ever took time off was to do 6 weeks of archaeological field school in the whole 4 years. And so like my life was shaped around work and study and preparing for class. And so if there were workshops or anything like that available, I never got to access them because I had to work all the time. So like when I finished school, I had zero guidance and zero advice. And all the jobs I'd ever had were in like food service, or, I used to deliver laundry, and then I worked at Costco. So I had no skills that were closely related to archaeology. And when I finished, I had to, like, I was totally adrift. For like a year, I couldn't figure out what to do. And I really wanted to do archaeology, but I had no idea how to find a job. And it wasn't until about a year later that I had an advisor who went through my line at Costco and was like, "What are you still doing here? How come you're like, why aren't you doing archaeology?" And I told him I didn't know how. I don't know where to go or what to do. And so he said, a couple of things like, quit your job, which I won't recommend that to anyone here, but he said, quit your job, because as long as you know where your paycheck's coming from and where you're going to eat, you're never going to try. Like your back's never going to be against the wall. But like Costco's one of those kind of like they promote from within based on like seniority purely, and it doesn't matter about your skills or intelligence or any of that stuff. It's just like however many hours and years you've worked, then you qualify for that job, and then like you can move up to the next one. So the pathway to becoming like a manager is like 10 to 15 years of labor. And then the pathway to make it to corporate is like 20 years of labor. And so, if you live in that world, then it's super predictable and you're sheltered and stuff, but then there's no real mechanism to shine, or why would you ever achieve when you still have to wait 9 more years to get a promotion? Who cares? So, he said to quit that job, but he also said to look in cultural resources. And that's the first time after I'd already finished my degree and been out for a year that anyone ever even mentioned that cultural resources existed. So some of the folks that I went to school with, they really, worked in the anthropology lab, and then they got guided into Forest Service internships, and they were able to trade time and like servitude to professors so that they could get jobs. I never got that, and I was just kind of left out there. So, you know, after I was done for a year or so, I finally understood there was cultural resources. I applied for jobs, and at the same time, I was noticing that they were all asking for like a master's degree or higher. So one of the things that I didn't know then that, you know, really shaped my career and helped me was that the Secretary of the Interior of the United States established standards way back in like 1971 or something like that for what is considered a professional archaeologist. And on some it depends on like what agency you're working for, or you know what the project is. Um, Sometimes they will require you to meet that Secretary of the Interior standards to work on the project. Most importantly, to like lead the project and write the report. And all these projects must have certain things, including a report. And the report can only be created by someone who meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. So companies super want to hire people who have a master's, but they of course have to hire people who don't, because master's folks aren't the only ones who do archaeology. And most people who go on to a master's, like I'm one of the rare ones, most people do work for the Forest Service, or they, you know, work in a lab, or they have an internship. And then that's what lets them know they want to do archaeology. And then they go on for a degree. Like I was kind of rare in that I just went through. So, you know, I was applying to graduate school at the same time. And I got into a couple graduate schools around the time, like after probably 90 days or so of just steadily applying through snail mail and online portals and stuff for archaeology jobs. I started to get real offers for full-time jobs. And you know, I was getting these offers, and then I told them, you know, I've been accepted to graduate school, and so I can work for X amount of weeks, but then I have to go away to grad school. And they were like, don't worry about working for us. Just go get your degree and then apply, and you'll be much more marketable. And so I was super fortunate because the graduate program I went to did a good job of, you know, getting cultural resources projects in the anthro department and then hiring the students to do the work. So really motivated undergraduate students, and definitely the graduate students, like we all worked on these highway projects. And so we got a little bit of actual experience, but also connected with, you know, the Forest Service and the Idaho Transportation Department. And, you know, that was really kind of the pathway for me to get my foot in the door and some experience. So then after that, you know, it's still not easy, because the other key piece of that Secretary of Interior's thing is that you need to have 1 year of supervisory experience. So it's like, you know, they're asking for all this stuff, and that ends up being a massive hurdle, which, you know, now it's coming to a head. They're running out of people who are qualified to do the work, and the pipeline of people who want to even go into this is drying up. And we can talk more about those reasons in a few minutes. But you know, that was the pathway that I took. And then after I had a year of experience, you know, being a crew chief, or you know, they included the time that I was working for the transportation department, and when I was, you know, working as a like a crew chief for archaeological field schools. I did that while I was a master's student too. I just took several projects. All of that eventually added up to where I had a year of experience. And then I applied for my register of professional archaeologist thing. And after that, then it wasn't hard at all. But you can imagine, like the pathway is not easy. And so you end up at this point where there's just fewer and fewer people who are able to do the job. And when you get to that level, then you know you have much more opportunity. Of course, it matters on what part of the country you live in, and what your experiences are in, and what your professional network is. But you know, eventually, if you want to stick with it for a while, I definitely recommend folks get a graduate degree, like at least a master's, because you'll hit this glass ceiling where you may be super good and have 5, 10 years of experience, but with your bachelor's, like they won't promote you any higher. And so your pay ends up getting stunted. What you can actually do is always stunted until you get that master's. Then magically, like you're open to the highest levels. So, so that's, you know, that's the pathway that most cultural resources folks that stay in for 10, 12 years, you know, 20 years, that's the pathway most people take if you want to do this for your career. Now, everyone who's here, you're at a really unique time, because there's a lot of stuff that's happened and will happen in the next 20 years. It's going to cause, you know, some huge impacts, and companies are starting to actually notice this, because the National Historic Preservation Act was signed into law in 1966, and it probably took like 10 years or so before you started to see real companies that were doing cultural resources consulting, because before that, it was universities that were doing the CRM. Government agencies realized we don't move, like no professor moves fast enough for, a project. Like we just don't get the stuff done. A lot of students who worked on those projects moved on to start their own companies, and that's where they found a niche where they could provide these professional advice and these services. So a lot of the oldest CRM companies started in the 70s and have been going for like 50 years now. And they have really used the pardon me, large pipeline of people who finish that have a field school that want to do archaeology. I mean, this is one of those jobs that people really want to do. And so, they've really preyed on us over the last few years, because they always assume that every single summer there's just going to be this crop of thousands of students that are all going to want to do archaeology, and they never have to increase wages. And even after that, there's going to be, hundreds of people with a master's. And so they've just been able to just, they never needed to raise wages. They never needed to worry about it, because there always just was this pipeline. Well, right now we're at the beginning of something that in higher ed, they call the enrollment cliff, which is where there's just fewer US citizens of college age in the United States. And it's only going to get worse for this entire generation, because people my age didn't have enough children. The older millennials didn't have enough children. And so there's just fewer people going in. And in the past, the United States has been able to just fill it with students from abroad or online students or something else. But that pipeline is maxed out too. And also, there's increased competition. Like, why would you come to the United States where you can't be a citizen when you can study in a place like, the EU, somewhere in the EU, Germany, or the Netherlands or something like that, different parts of Africa, different parts of Asia, and actually be able to stay there. So now there's less motivation for people to come to the United States because of our xenophobic laws. So you all are in this cohort, and you're at a university where you're kind of insulated from this, where like we're increasing enrollments because it's Berkeley. But if you look around the country, there's a lot of universities, their enrollments are going down and down, and they're scrambling to figure out what they're going to do, because without enrollments, there's no, like, the university struggles, right? So that pipeline of just like easy, low-hanging students is drying up. Also, the pandemic made it way worse. There's a lot of people who just went into jobs because they were hiring anyone, and they're like, I can go to college later. Well, all that stuff delays folks getting that professional experience, right? So then you end up in the situation where there's like, I mean, I can't remember, we're down like 2.7 million students from before the pandemic. And that's coming at a time when we have even fewer college age adults. Also at a time when the students who come through the pandemic, if you're young, you have a chance to catch up. If you're in high school right now, like your test scores and everything could all be damaged because you didn't go to school for 2 years, like you learned on YouTube. So all this stuff is putting huge pressure on universities, which is starting to ripple into cultural resources. And then there are 50 years of bad management practices, right? Where, they never paid anyone any money. They just thought we would all work for free because it was our calling and all. I mean, you're seeing it in education too. Nobody wants to be a teacher. Nobody wants to be abused at their job. And young people are just like, why would I ever do that when I can, like, work at Costco or work at Target or, work for Google and Microsoft? Like, why would I ever undergo this punishment that I can get a better job somewhere else? So in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of forums and special meetings and emergency meetings among the CRM companies. And I've, like every single month, somebody reaches out to me looking for students, to hire students to go and work, because they're just scrambling to try to find anyone who's going to fill that situation. And, like when there's not many people to do it, you can command a higher wage, because why would you work for peanuts at this one place when you can get a livable wage somewhere else? Like, why would you ever work in, Louisiana when you can work in, LA or the Bay Area where the weather's much better? Like, why would you choose to work in North Dakota or Montana where you're going to get laid off in the winter when they need people in Arizona and New Mexico and Texas, and you can work year round, right? So like the people who have the skills right now, the market is like yours. The basket is open for you all. And that's pretty rare in, cultural resources. It's pretty rare for government agencies to be like, we can't find anyone who want to work for the government. The government is a secure job with benefits. Like, when has there ever been a time when people are like, nah, I don't want to work for the water district. I don't want to work for the Forest Service. I can make more money somewhere else. Like, sorry, I can drive Uber, or I can have 3 different Uber drivers for me, or 5 different people work for Amazon and drive vans for me and make way more money. So the government's like, their one thing of stable whatever is not enticing enough, right? So that's what I when I first started doing archaeology, there was all this money for fiber optic lines, and they were building a lot of subdivisions in the early 2000s. And that was really, keeping the ball rolling for a lot of companies. And then that all dried up during the recession. And then there was, American reinvestment ARA money that was for federal jobs. And if you were in a company that was good enough to get those, that's what kept us alive. Well, now's another boom time when there's hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure projects that need to get done. There's expansion in a lot of different things because their tax coffers are full right now, and they can't find archaeologists. So that's what I have to say about that. If folks are so, I guess, folks want to know how you get a job. There's Next week we'll have someone who's an expert with the government, because I still never cracked that. I don't know what the government's looking for. Cultural resources wants people who can do the work, who are skilled, and who are available. Like I said, it's hard to break in the beginning, but when you have worked for a couple different companies and your name is in their Rolodex of people to hire, and they know your skills, also you're building your skills the whole while, I'd say probably a year or so, then you get in a loop where they're constantly calling you. So when you're first starting out, nobody knows who you are. But once they get going, then, people are constantly calling you and asking you to work on projects. And, at certain points in time, you can pick and choose. And then other times you have to move to another place and work there for a month or something else. So right now is one of those times where you probably could actually pick and choose. Actually, I know some people who are, in California. I think it's kind of a sad thing, but they have a thing called on call, where you just basically register with several different companies, which means you filled out your W-2s and you're in their computer as someone who's willing to work in, the Bay Area or Northern California or all the way over to Reno or whatever. And so they know of you. And when they have a project, they just start going down the list of trying to find someone who will do that work. And, you can ask them more about it. Like, well, what's the per diem? Do I get, gas money? Like, are you going to pay me on the days that I'm not actually at the site? Like, what's the deal? What's the full details? And then you can choose. Of course, in the beginning, you can't really turn too many down, or they'll just stop calling you. But once they know you're good, then they'll be like, well, sorry, you couldn't make it. Okay, well, we'll call you back later, And that's how it was when I first started out too, even before there was the online Rolodex. I mean, we used to have an actual folder, a paper folder of resumes and phone numbers, a list of phone numbers. And when you needed people for a project, you would just get on the phone and just start calling until enough people had answered the phone and accepted to work with you. And so I think we're back to those times again right now. Folks have any other questions?
I guess my question would be, so I was applying to internships all last year for the summer and I couldn't get any, so I just went home. So
Yeah.
what would you put on a resume at like this, not yet finished the bachelor's, but are going to finish in the next year? What skills would you put and what classes and stuff?
Yeah, sure. That, that's the toughest question, right? Because it's like, we want people who have experience, and then it's like, how do you get experience? Oh, well, you get experience because you have experience. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't have experience, so how am I going to get the job? That's a rough place to be. My suggestion, of course, would be like, you're playing the person. You're not playing the hand you're dealt. You're playing the person you're playing cards against. Every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser. So in every job, you're trying to make yourself attractive to that specific person. So with like the government jobs, they have a bunch of fair, equal opportunity regulations where they're not allowed to like tell you information about the job. And, you're kind of firewalled. You're not allowed to really talk to them about what the specifics of the job are. But for museums and companies and stuff like that, like, um, they can't discriminate at all, but they're going to hire the people that they know and like. And so when you're looking at these internships, uh, one of the, if you're looking at an internship that's at a university, you want to know like who's the individual who's running it, and then what do you have in common with that individual? Are you from the same part of the country? Do you like the same sports team? Did your parents go to the same alma mater? Like, are you interested in stone tools? And they also are too. All those human angle things. And you have a list of all the internships you applied for. So if you were to go for those again this next summer, like now's the time to start cold call connecting and saying, I'm trying to collect information about careers. I want to know like what are you specifically looking for, because I've taken this class and I see, you also have taken ZooArc, and like, you teach ZooArc, and or this PhD student is specializing in isotopes on these different kinds of rat teeth or something like that. Like, these are the things that I have a thread that's connecting. Can we talk? When they know of you and stuff, and you hear what they have to say about that, then it makes it easier for you to write the kind of application materials that speak directly to that employer. And that's also the pathway for cultural resources too. Like if you're trying to move from place to place, if you're trying to, break into the industry, you want to find out about the people, because it's people who are hiring you, not machines, not, robots or, soldiers or something like that. Any pathway you can to talk to humans or find out about humans, people are going to like people who like them or like the same things that they like. And it's just kind of like part of what humans do. And, you can always use that in a situation like finding a job to really help you out. Like that's the piece that you have, the fact that they're human beings too. Now, once again, that doesn't work with the government jobs because they're not allowed to just hire the people. Well, they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to just hire the people that they know unless they meet all these criteria, and they'll have extraneous, very detailed things that you have to have. So that is kind of like, the one thing about the government jobs is like the software doesn't sort people by like score necessarily. It just, the software looks to see who meets the criterion, which obviously we can lie on those apps, right? The software is not going to know. We can lie. Eventually you'll have to be truthful. If you want to just waste someone's time, you can always make anything up. And that's one of the things that they're starting to think, like they're starting to realize people can game those softwares. But the other thing is they just start at the top of who submitted that qualified. So once you make it past the portal, that's like you have all the degree and the experience and this and that, you can be interviewed. They just start looking down the list. They don't go alphabetically. They don't. So if you wait on a government application till like the final day that it's closing, hundreds of people have already applied before you. And there's going to be dozens that already meet the criteria. And your name is in the Z's, right? Way down there. And so they're going to just keep going until they get the amount of people. There's no requirement that they look at every single resume, right? They may look for you because they know you, but that's still not going to help you beat out the other candidates who have applied. In CRM, they can just hire you straight up. You want to work Tuesday? Great. You got a college degree? Right on. So show up with a driver's license, and I want to see transcripts, and then you're in. Like there's no, they don't have to follow any kind of stuff for entry level jobs. With the higher ones, they will. They'll need to see your master's degree, your diploma, what classes you took. They want to see your thesis and all that stuff. But in the beginning, it's just, are you a good citizen that's not a felon? Can you drive? Can you carry a backpack that weighs 20 pounds up a mountain? Can you work for 10 hours on Tuesday? Those are the things they're looking for. So those internships, what I would do, if there's any that you still really want to get, ask for an exit interview and ask them, hey, I applied and I didn't really get any response, or I didn't get the job. And I see that you did the internship. It didn't get canceled. So like, what can I do to improve my, they'll go down, oh, look at your application. Well, we're really looking for someone who was specialized in this. You can decide whether you want to go get specialized in that, right? Like, if that's interesting to you, sweet. If not, then okay, well, I can't do anything if I'm not the person they're looking for. That's a good question though. That was the question that always haunted me too. And I would hand in resumes and never hear anything, or I would get one that says, "We're sorry you didn't make the cut, you know, tough luck, apply another day." But then after a few months, I started calling them and saying, you know, how come I didn't make it? And they're like, "Oh, we're looking for someone with more field experience. Oh, this one was going to be a, you know, Native American site that you've never even seen that culture before. We don't have time to teach you all about, you know, Central Coast um, uh, archaeology, prehistoric archaeology. So sorry." And then like also know that you're going to hear no way more often than you hear yes. And it's not personal. They're not saying no, they don't like, no, they don't like you. No, you don't have what it takes. They're just saying you weren't the one they wanted right now. Because you, like I said, you can always go get those skills and then apply back if you super want to do that job and increase your chances of getting hired. Or you can just say, oh, well, that makes sense. Like, yeah, no, I don't have that fishbone experience. And like, I don't want to really spend 5 years learning fish bones to get hired for this job.
I don't know if other people have questions, but the other thing I always wondered is it seems like grad schools, like random schools are actually good at CRM, and it's never like, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's like random schools. So what are the like good schools, probably also ones that have funding for masters in archaeology?
Yeah, so you know, I went the so that's a good question too, because more schools are starting to come out with programs that are oriented towards cultural resources. Um you know, I don't really, other than Sonoma State and the University of British Columbia's Heritage Conservation Program, you know, there's other schools that are known for certain things that feed to cultural resources, but I don't really know other specific CRM uh, schools. I know there's a new one in New Mexico, but one of the things I would say is like, you know, funding is like the absolute paramount thing. It's not the only thing, but you shouldn't be depriving yourself to get these degrees, right? Because like in the beginning, it, for your undergrad, you know, you're applying and the universities are accepting you, and like really universities are oriented towards undergrads. It's, you know, how can we get more recruitments? How can we meet the needs of the undergrad students? Like, how can we do everything that we can to make sure that undergrads are satisfied and stay enrolled and all that other stuff? And then, you know, some will actually care about you getting a job afterwards. I never went to any of those schools, but some care. Uh, but with the graduate thing, it's a different thing. And I still haven't really figured out how come universities have graduate programs. I don't know if it necessarily comes with more money or like what's going on. I'm still kind of new to academia. But I do know that the funding thing is huge for the university, and it's also for the student. So you know, a couple of strategies is like going to a terminal master's program. I went to a terminal master's program, and what that means is the university, like their anthro department, just ends in the master's. So all the TAs for the undergrad classes are master students. All the people who work in the lab that would be lab supervisors or work on these projects, they're master students. The people who are the crew chiefs on the field schools for that university, it's going to be master students. So you don't have to compete directly with the PhD students, which at a PhD granting institution, a lot of times that ends up being the graduate group that gets the lion's share of all the attention, right? So if you go to a place like I went to Arizona for my PhD, I don't know if that necessarily would have been so hot of a place to go for my master's, because I would have paid retail for the whole thing without a chance to, you know, really work in labs or work with, be a TA or anything, because the PhDs were sucking up all that space. So, you know, I don't, I, I don't know. Arizona is a good school. It's good because the graduate degree program, the classes are after 5 o'clock, so you can work all day and still do your master's. Like if your employer was paying for it or something like that, that'd be great. But with the PhDs there, it makes it really hard for you to get the attention that you would at a terminal MA. So that's important. And then the deal that they offer students is super important too. So just because it's a terminal MA doesn't mean that they actually give you any funding, right? Like they might not give you any TA positions, or you might have to compete against others, or they might have 6 TA spots for like 22 master students. Like that's a horrible spread, right? They might say that you're not eligible for TA after the first year because they need to maintain X amount of master students. So the first year, yeah, that's great. You get some money, but then after that, you're just like on your own, right? At Idaho, where I went, it was 2 years, so 4 semesters. They'd give me a TA position, but I didn't get like a tuition waiver. When you go for a PhD, most of the time you are going to get a tuition waiver. You're going to get, the chance to teach your own class. You're going to get, other kinds of fellowships open up for you too. So like the math on a PhD is different. Um, the other thing is it's much longer for a PhD, and you're at like graduate student wages, which is not lucrative, right? So you're stuck there for many years. Whereas with a master's, it's like you're in and out. You only really have to sacrifice for like 1 or 2 years, right? And then you're off and going. So like, look for those things. And then when you're before you apply to graduate schools, you really should be like, not really interrogating, but you should be asking a lot of questions to the people who are running it. Like, what's the ratio advisor? Are there some instructors who have no graduate students, which is a red flag for like a crummy advisor, versus like some that are just overwhelmed because they're awesome and that's who you want to work with, and they're not taking anymore because they have 15 graduate students, right? So like that's a real thing. Don't go to any like PhD program. Don't even apply to one that you don't get a tuition waiver for anthropology. It's just not worth it. Like that's a med school thing, because the job that you get at the end is not guaranteed to make enough money for you to have paid back $160,000 in student loans. So just don't do it. For a master's program, like I said, looking for those TA spots in labs. Like, do they have that? Is that a thing they do? And then what kind of work do the professors do? Is it all just like, Professor so-and-so does the Paleolithic in France, Professor XYZ goes to Brazil, this other person goes off to the Maya ruins, no one even works in the United States? It's going to be very hard for you to it'll be harder for you to get a CRM job if you did these exotic field schools, because you never will have done any American archaeology. And people are really jealous and fickle, and they'll be like, oh, you worked in France, you couldn't possibly know what's going on in Connecticut, because magically somehow stone tools are way different. So they'll just, they kind of overlook you, and then you have to prove yourself yet again. Whereas if you just did a field school in Connecticut, they'd be like, oh, well, you know all about the stone tools in Connecticut, and you're a Connecticut person. And so now, like, okay, sweet, I like you now. Once again, people like people who know stuff. So, CRM field school, that's great if you can find a CRM master's program that's oriented towards that. But it shouldn't be like don't count out other quality places where you could get like, a TA position, and it's in an affordable town, and it's accredited place, and there's like 3 professors that do, transportation highway projects, right? Because you could get in there and then they could have a bunch of artifacts from some project that they did, and then you get to be the master student who works on that. And then that's like, you're connecting with that place. Your professors know people in that state. You're getting a different pathway than if you go off to an exotic place. And when you do those investigations, like really kind of think wider than you would. I mean, there's a lot of privileges from being a California resident, because you have a lot of universities here and you get the in-state rate, right? But like, don't count out other places. Some states have these really well-funded programs, and you're a Berkeley graduate, you're probably going to get in. So, don't count out leaving California for these other programs. Like, you're a top commodity student. Yeah, yes.
Hi, thank you for all this. This is like very good information. I was wondering if you might talk about your own research that you're doing right now. I think
Mhm.
in what you're doing with cultural research, resource management.
Yeah, yeah. So, I have some ongoing stuff. Like I started a project in 2013 in Idaho, in this neighborhood that was this it was this working class mixed race neighborhood, and I did a public archaeology project. And just this last week, I was there because our work took place in this house that was still standing, and now it's a property that's been nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. So it'll be the first African American, well, the first in place African American historic property, and the second one in the city of Boise. And so I'm still working on that project because it's now been a success. And so the idea is like, how can we get other communities? Like, how can the folks who run this historic preservation department in the city of Boise, like, how can they help other communities save properties, and like, what are the mechanisms in the city to do that? And then there's also other projects too, like there's other sites in the city. And so I'm still working with folks from old University of Idaho, still trying to provide fieldwork opportunities for students and stuff there. And so, you know, we had some pretty productive meetings, and we're going to move forward with some more stuff. And then I also, since 2017, I've been doing a community-based project on the island of St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands at a former sugar plantation. And that's a pretty complicated one, but we've got scholars from a lot of different universities, and we're working with the Black community there on island, also doing field schools that are open to students from historically Black colleges and universities. So they can, you know, a lot of students come from these schools, they don't have anthropology departments or archaeology, and they've never seen a Black archaeologist before. So, you know, that opportunity to work in these communities with other Black folks who are doing historic preservation, and then do that archaeology on these ancestral sites, that's something that we're going to do it again next year. And I don't know, we might take some years off to kind of consolidate all the years that we've already done. So those are two things that are going on. And the other side of that, the Virgin Islands used to be the Danish West Indies. And so I actually have a trip in November to go do some research and look at some museum exhibits on the Danish West Indies, and talk to preservationists about the way that that whole slave trading and colonialism time is talked about in Denmark, because I'm seeing how it's handled in the Virgin Islands, and then I'm also seeing how it's handled in Denmark, but I'm not Danish, so I don't know. Like, I have to actually talk to people there and try to figure out, so what does this mean, and how does it make you feel, and how come these are the words that you all use rather than these other words? Because that's the way folks in the West Indies or the Virgin Islands, that's how they talk about it. So how come you don't talk about it the same way? So that's an ongoing project there too. I have another project too that's kind of a citizen scientist thing, where we're monitoring this site in Richmond, California, that's being trashed by sea level rise and climate change and stuff. And it's a Chinese shrimp camp from the 19th century. And it's a tough situation, because there was a shell mound there that we're not sure if it's been leveled and used as fill to cover this archaeological layer. And then, of course, shell mounds, the University of California in like 1917 dug into it, of course, and took human remains and grave goods. They're at the Hearst. They haven't been repatriated, right? So there's that whole thing going on. And there's this site that's eroding away. And if we build a wall to armor the shore and keep the site from going away, then the beach, which is important for other species, and it's a beach park, is going to erode away. The sand will all wash away. But if we don't, then the whole damn thing is going to erode till it's like flat, because the ocean is higher. So it's like we don't know how this is going to work, and excavating it's not necessarily an option, because you have to dig through what could be human remains to get to the historic layer, which Cal's already did that sin years ago and hasn't atoned for it. So I don't want to add more damage to indigenous heritage sites by digging into them. So we're just, all we can do is just watch. And this is going to be the story that plays out in the United States around our whole coastline, right? Because from Florida to Maine to Alaska down to San Diego, our whole coastline is getting ravaged, and it's not all getting ravaged evenly. And coasts are places where people live, so sites are getting wasted. That's all there really is to it. those are the ones that I have going on right now. Of course, there's a million in the hopper. Just add money and they become real projects.
Yeah, that's all. Those are all so interesting to hear from. Like, especially, like a lot of those places that you mentioned, like, well, like obviously Shell Mound, but also like all the way down to San Diego. There's Coast and St. Croix. My dad was Coast Guard, and we were stationed in Puerto Rico for a little bit. So I I am sure that he mentioned St. Croix at some point. It sounds like I heard him talk about his time there. So it was all very local to me.
Yeah.
So that's very, very interesting stuff. Damn it, I had something else to ask and I forgot. So I'll see if I can remember it in the next couple minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, climate change is a major piece of these ones in St. Croix too, because that place got ripped by hurricanes Irma and Maria and sideswiped by this last one, Fiona. But this is the season every year, in the fall and winter is the time when these hurricanes come, and trying to create resilience, right? Because every time there's one of these catastrophic ones, those islands, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, are U.S. territories, and there's a lot of incentive for folks to just pack up shop and move to the mainland. So take it easy. So we don't want everyone to leave their homes, but then that ends up happening, right? Because like if they destroy all the schools, how are your kids going to finish school? Better get them enrolled in Texas, right? Or Massachusetts. Better go to where you have family. So that ends up happening each time. And I know there's probably people from Puerto Rico, once the airport's open, are going to have to do something. They're going to go because their house just got washed away.
I remembered. Yeah, definitely. We were lucky enough, I think, that we ditched the major hurricanes, but it's definitely like I remember hurricane season over there, and we were scared that something a fraction of the size of what they're getting now was going to hit the island, and we managed to squeeze in a window like 2007 to 2010 where we got lucky, right? But I was wondering what is if there is a significant difference between or distinction between the work you do and like if there's a similar project that's done by like the government, because you had mentioned that the government is a big source of like jobs in this space.
Yeah. So that's a good question. If they're smart, they just hire me, because then they don't have, I'm the one who fields the people and I do the research and all that stuff, rather than going through the onerous system of hiring 92 people to do XYZ for like 3 weeks and giving them benefits and getting them all through the whole thing, which is like prohibitive. They don't have the dough to hire and keep on all of us to work for them. So if they're wise, they'll choose someone without an economic incentive, right? Like not a CRM company, to do the work. However, in reality, there's not enough. Like I couldn't do more than one a year anyway, because I'm here. I have a whole nother job. So the government contracts 95% at least of their actual historic preservation obligations to consultants, because they don't have the capacity, and we don't fund the Bureau of Land Management well enough to have 19 people always on staff for this one unit to just dig this one site, which is what we need. We need that many people for like 6 weeks, and then after that we don't need them all. So the government does have money for these summertime positions, a lot of times internships or temporary contracted positions. They're not internships, but you'll get a government pay schedule, a GS number, and then that enables you to move throughout the pay scale and move through other agencies. So the big difference is like the government doesn't have the actual capacity to handle the historic preservation obligations for its massive area that it administers. Me, on the other hand, I have no land to administer. I only have projects to do, right? So I don't have all the same overhead obligations that they do, because I don't have millions of acres to take care of hundreds of thousands of historic properties like they do. So that's the biggest difference between what I do. I do like one project for several years. They have, like a place like Yosemite will have a round robin of like, 700 archaeological sites they have to re-identify and do a damage assessment every year, and they do them in 10-year rotations. And so you're talking about 7,000 sites that summertime workers go around. You can imagine how many people it would take to do all 7,000 of them in 1 year. So they schedule them out where you go around the park to check out all these different sites. And when they need to do something like a bridge expansion, that's like a one-time thing. So they have a budget to go around and do all their assessments. But if a bridge washes out and they need it fixed, well, that cash is not, that's already earmarked for their obligations to do all 7,000 sites. That's where they need to hire you or a CRM company or someone to come do the work, because that's like a one-off thing. Someone has to check these cultural resources, including the bridge itself, probably in Yosemite, before they rebuild the bridge. So that's how, they're a lot of times for the government, you have archaeologists that do the work. That's a small number, and a lot of times they're doing the going around and checking sites or watching CRM companies do the work. Their job will take them all over the park, but they only have a couple of folks that do that. And then they'll have, one person who's kind of the director, or maybe a small staff, like in the case of Yosemite or Yellowstone, like the well-funded parks, they'll have 2 or 3, 5 people who are the staff archaeologists. And then they hire seasonal folks, probably 5, 10, 20 folks to do all that other work. But in the event that they really need a thing like a road widening or an airstrip rebuilt or a damage assessment for a forest fire, they have to contract that work out.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So how many hours have you already all spent on Zoom today or in class? Who's got 4 under their belt today? 4, 2, 2. That's okay. You'll be doing something else later. We'll make you do some other intellectual challenge. Other folks there, I don't want to interrupt your order at Jack in the Box. If you're in the drive-through, turn down the microphone so they don't hear me say anything about a large curly fry. Nobody heard that. Nobody knows about curly fries. You don't want that. 3, you wrap. Oh my gosh, grinding. So how's this semester going? I'm asking folks. What's up? Are we back to normal? Or are we still in this weird shadow world, right? The upside down. Are we in the upside down still, or are we back?
I think a lot of anthro professors aren't teaching this semester, so the class selection was a little slim. Like next semester, we're all kind of excited. It looks a little better.
Good.
And
Who's going to take my classes? What am I teaching next semester even?
You're teaching Intro to Cultural Heritage next semester. And I was wondering, it's under a different number. I took it when it was 128. Is it the same class? Okay.
Yeah, it took me 5 years to make it an official class. I taught it 4 times, and then the university finally approved that it be as a real class. So now it has its own number. But the heritage conservation class, the first half of it is learning historic preservation law. Because when I was surveying companies and government agency folks that hire all of you, they said they wanted you to do all kind, everything, right? I want them to be totally strong and drive a snowmobile, and I was like, I can't get them to do all that stuff. But technical writing and learning the laws were the 2 things that was common in every job. So the class is learning the historic preservation laws for like the first half, and then after that we watch how they're applied. So things like gentrification, heritage tourism, the impacts of the environment on historic properties and like what communities can do about that. That's what the other half of the class is. So you'll know the laws. You can't make it through that class without knowing the National Historic Preservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the California Environmental Quality Act. Those are the 3 laws that we focus on. Then there's some stuff about the Berkeley City Code, but yeah, we focus on the laws, and so people will know how that thing works, which is huge because most professors don't teach that. My graduate class, Ethical Issues in Heritage Conservation, is like a simulation of what it's like to apply for a proposal, do a request for proposals It's like what CRM does. You learn those ins and outs, and it's open to undergrads, upper division undergrads. And we meet once a week, but you have to work with the other people in the class. But I always make people work with other people in the class anyway. Like you're gonna have to do a group project. If you've ever taken my class, you know that, yeah, because it's the one thing that's difficult to cheat. And the university will actually let me do that. It's better than writing 92 papers. So you know, I invite students who really want to do archaeology to take that class, because if you're an upper division student, it's just we have people from CRM companies who call in and talk about budgeting and taxes and like wages and how to calculate prevailing wage, like how to negotiate a deal on backhoe services and stuff like that. Like you'll learn a little bit about the laws, but you'll really look at how you even would put together a proposal. And it's super valuable if you ever go to graduate school. But then if you do cultural resources, this was the backstory behind where you got to go out and do the survey. Like they had to have done this in order for you to get the money to go do the survey. So like you learn how CRM operates in that class. And it's always hoped that folks will go from that class like straight to the field. Like the first assignment is a 1-page resume that you are able then to give to the people who come in or the guest speakers in the class, right? So like you're interviewing the hiring managers of a company, and then they tell you how to like do a budget or how to do like a research design, right? So if folks are interested, send me an email. I'll send you the syllabus from the last class. You'll get an idea of how it all works. But you know, those are the two I'm teaching, and it says it's a graduate class. All I do is just say you're approved, unless you're like a first year student, and then I'm like, no, you should take other classes first before you just jump right in. Like this is a lot to jump right in. And the reading load is not that much because you're the one who has to find all the resources, and like you all control the amount of readings, which will be extensive because you all will read more. Each one leads to another one. You don't have to read every single word though. You just have to know what's in it. Any other questions? I hope that folks do take my classes next semester. I haven't been here for a while. It's like I have a teaching release and then COVID, right? I can always hide behind that. Who else has been hiding behind COVID? Nobody wants to say that on video, right? I wasn't doing that, Oski Bear, not me. I was available at every moment.
I am going to stop the recording now, just letting you know.